Good afternoon and welcome from IDM, the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe, coming to you live from Alsergrund. We are gathering here today in a cooperation effort from IDM together with the Institute of European Integration and Regional Studies at the Yuriy Fedkovych Chernivtsi National University and the Center for the Study of Conflict and Peace at the University of Osnabrück, represented by, on the one hand side, Anatoliy Kruglashov, and on the other hand side, Ulrich Schneckener. Thank you very much also to our other panelists that are joining us. We will introduce the panelists in a second when we start the discussion, but we would like to say a few words in the beginning from the side of the organizers. My name is Sebastian Schäffer, and I'm the Managing Director of the Institute for the Danube region in Central Europe. And we will look today under the topic Regional Perspectives on the War in Ukraine with two panels on the ongoing war in our neighborhood that has been going on for more than 4 months, 131 days to be precise. When in 2019, Anatoliy and Ulrich, together with us, organized a seminar to work on future scenarios. We had some weird deliberations, we had some worse outcomes, but none of the scenarios that the students developed had foreseen that there will be a war with Russia in 2022. Now, these exercises are not there to predict the future, but there has been a lot of creative freedom, of course, for the students that came from Germany and Moldova, as well as Ukraine. In that sense, nobody would have predicted that we are arriving at this stage where we are right now. Many assumptions in these future scenarios have not become a reality. Many assumptions that we have made also in the expert community in the past couple of weeks and months have not materialized, but a lot of things have been discussed. We believe that it is very important to continue the information and the exchange. We must not get tired to talk about this. We have therefore this wonderful panel discussion split into two panels where we, as I said, will have an introduction of our panelists in a second. I have the pleasure to moderate the first round. Ulrich will take over the second round, and details for the discussion will be given in a minute, but now I hand over to Anatoliy to also say a few words of welcome.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for your introduction, for your invitation, for the platform you provided for our dialogue and conversation. It was me who initiated this conference as mainly an expert conference to discuss the issues of the Russian-Ukrainian war, its repercussion and its consequences, as well as its roots, sources, and origin, because it's very touchy for the European order, for the international relations, for the sustainability of not only Ukraine and neighboring countries, countries of the Danube region included, but for the all the world. We have a rupture of the peaceful development in Europe since the Balkan Wars, post-Yugoslavian crisis. We have a very dangerous turns on the events here. And so far, I do support completely the ideas of Sebastian Schäffer that we have to discuss, we have to have exchange of opinions, because in my opinion, experts are a very important part of policy making and decision making procedures. We have to be most informed, we have to share our knowledge with us, with the wider community, with public officers, and for sure with politicians. in European Union and NATO countries, and for now, Ukraine is recognized to be a candidate state to the EU. That's very important advancement of us. I really appreciate, I do remember our beautiful international seminar or summer school in Chernivtsi 2018, where we cooperated together with Sebastian and Ulrich. And moreover, I had a very great respect to IDM. For years, I visited at least twice this institution in Vienna, and I hope to be there once again, at least not only once again, again and again. And it's very important to stress that this triangle of Osnabrück, Vienna, and Chernivtsi, Czernowitz is absolutely natural, because we are all concerned equally about the security, prosperity, and stability in Europe. And now we are looking for the best solution of this ugly war, of this deepest European and world crisis. And therefore, I'm really pleased that such a good experts from the neighboring countries, including Romania, for instance, for me, as from the Bukovina, it's very important neighbors, and not only neighbors, it's really partners, friends for me. So far, it's very good that we are a chance to discuss, to look around for the best solution, and to look how to be more consolidated, more resilient, and more strong together. So now I have a pleasure to transmit or transfer the power of welcoming address to my friend and colleague Yuriy Schäffer, who is professor at Osnabrück University. Osnabrück is officially the partner university for Chernivtsi University, and in the same time, Professor Schäffer has a great expertise and conflict and peace problems. He worked in the sphere more than several decades, and therefore recently we had exchange with my colleague seminar in Osnabrück University on the war in Ukraine, and he paid back with his seminar on these stances of Germany and the EU towards the Russian-Ukrainian war. So far, I am very pleased that together with Sebastian Schäffer and Yuriy Schäffer, we are organizing and launching this seminar, and I hope that this cooperation and cooperative mood of us will be continued successfully in the future. Ulrich, you are welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anatoliy. There's not much to add, actually. I'm also very grateful that we could gather these two panels for today. I also like to thank you, IDM, already for making this possible. Also my colleagues to take the initiative. I think we meet at in a very crucial period, not only a very crucial period regarding the ongoing war, like the events we have followed in the past days, what's happening in Donbass region, and the situation for Ukraine as a whole is getting very serious and difficult at the moment. But we also meet at a time when we have followed a series of international summits, the EU summit, the G7 summit, and the NATO summit. And I think here we have a lot to discuss today in both panels about the fallout of these summits and what they mean for the future of European security order, because no matter how this war will end, we see already the first signs, the first developments, how the future of European security might look like. And it will certainly be an order which will not be, the question will not be with or without Russia, but it will largely be how to organize security in Europe, in the wider Europe, against Russia, at least as long as the regime of Vladimir Putin stays in power. So I think this is, so it's a very timely situation. We see so these developments on the European level, and we also have the ongoing situation in Ukraine, and I think we should discuss both and link the two things together as well. So I'm really looking forward to this exchange. And by this, I rather would like to hand back to Sebastian and welcome all of you.
Thank you very much. And as we have a lot of things to discuss, and we want to discuss a lot also with our guests in the webinar, but also the ones who join our live stream on YouTube. We will start with this panel discussion right away. And I would like to introduce the first panel, the participants of the first panel. The first panel is called Assessing the Dynamics of the War, Military, Political, and Humanitarian Situation in Ukraine. And we have three outstanding panelists from different regions in Ukraine. And I would start from west to east here. We have already heard from Anatoliy Kruglashov, head of the Department of Political Science and Public Administration, and the director of the Institute of European Integration and Regional Studies at the Yuriy Fedkovych Chernivtsi National University. One more time, Anatoliy, thank you for joining us. Then
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I am switching in the microphone. It seems okay. Now it's, I'm heard, yeah?
Yes.
Fine. Dear colleagues, first of all, it's not a propaganda meeting. It is a sharing of the opinions, expertise, and analysis of what is going on with regard to Ukraine and Eastern Europe and Europe in general by and large. And first of all, I would like to say that it's no novelty that Russia is an aggressive country because it is historically proved. And when I grew up in USSR, for instance, I belong to the generation of Afghanistan war. Just by chance, I wasn't recruited to this war and went to the Baltic and then later to the Northern Fleet of USSR by chance. And so in that time, I was wondering why, and my peers, we were wondering why and what we are doing there in Afghanistan. I don't know as far how many Russians now wonder about their presence in Ukraine as the soldiers, as the killers, as the murderers, and as occupiers. I don't know, because to trust Russian sociological polls, it's hardly a reasonable deal so far. But I would like to say that for me, the evolution of Russian foreign policy is worthy to be mentioned, first of all. Then look, first of all, let me recall the first concept of Russian foreign policy, so-called, which shared Europe and the Euro-Atlantic and Eurasia into two spheres, the far and near abroad, where Russia pretended to be the master of the so-called near abroad, meaning the post-Soviet space. And unfortunately, then time many of Western leaders accepted this move because they were proud and happy that Russia evacuated its presence, I mean military forces, from the former GDR, Poland, then later with the pressure of the West from Baltic states and so on and so forth. But with the coming to Putin to power, Russian policy, both domestic and foreign, became to evolve very fast in the sphere of chauvinism and extreme nationalism. And when Russia resolved the Second Chechnya War and restored so-called constitutional order, and when Russia successfully joined the last carriage of the train of anti-terrorist league or coalition, led with the United States. So then time Russia emerged as a new power with the pretense to be first the regional leader, then the true master of the Eurasia, and later on the only country which could compete only in Russian imagination with the United States. The rest of the world does not deserve Russia's attention. So now we have the Russia as a country which provides the true imperial policy. My personal concept is, I tried to develop it since 2008 only, before the Russian-Georgian war. But for me, this is a concept of the retro-imperialism, because when I define the Russian policy, it could be implied three main concepts: traditional classical imperialism, neo-imperialism, and I don't see that they are applicable towards the Russian case. My idea is that Russia is a retro-imperial country which tries to be back to the historical might when Russia was Russia still is the biggest country in the world, yeah, but Russia wasn't only the largest, but one of the mightiest country in the world, including the Alaska, it's part of California, part of the, the Central Eastern Europe, including Poland, including Finlandia, and so on, Finnish lands, and so on and so forth. So Russia tries to be a rhetoric imperial power to take back the lands it lost since the revolution of 1917, since the breakdown of the USSR in 1991. So in this sense, Putin as a leader, so-called national leader of Russian Federation, he tries to conduct this rhetoric imperial policy. Russia, together with the leaders, went into the dark of the past instead of moving towards the brightest, as it was promised by communists once upon a time, to the brightest future. And from this respect, Ukraine, as Zygmunt Brzezinski and other thinkers warned us that Ukraine is a cornerstone for the restoring of Russian imperial might. And now Russia, after the first very important turn from the soft power exercisement in before 2008, since the Russian-Georgian war, Russia felt that it can and could and it might imply the hard power upon this post-Soviet space. And the next question was, after the Georgia, who could be the next victim of Russian rhetoric imperial thirst and ambitions? Ukraine happened to be. So since 2014, we have this war in Ukraine, which was first limited with the annexation of Crimea and the creation of the puppet show of this so-called People's Republic of Donetsk and Luhansk in Donbass. But you know that in February, 2 days before the full-scale intervention to Ukrainian territory, Putin signed up the so-called recognition of this public, republics. This republic, so-called Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. So it was precluded again with the long-standing policy of latest USSR and early Russia, when Russia supported the secessionist movement around in the conflict of the Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. Less of all, it was the creature of Moscow, but still Moscow tried to interfere in favor of making the only moderator and mediator Kremlin and Russia. Then later it appeared with regard to Abkhazian and South Ossetian conflict and Transnistrian conflict. Everywhere, Russia tried to be a peacekeeper, so-called, providing that this peacekeeping mission should make Russia just inevitable master of post-Soviet space, the only true leader and the only country which possesses the key positions there. Ukraine was an obstacle on the imperialist thirst of Russia. And Russia decided to punish Ukraine and to conquer Ukraine, because in the beginning there were a mixture of different slogans and purposes of the war: denazification of Ukraine, my gosh, demilitarization of Ukraine. But finally, many of Russian officials said they are going to stop on this moment on the Ukrainian-Polish border. So this war is terrible. We have around 1/5 of our territory occupied with Russian force. We lost a lot of not only military men and women, but civilians. We know that only in Mariupol, it was killed more than 20,000 of people. By the way, 2 of my students escaped from Mariupol. One was lucky enough to escape in the first week, and another one suffered 2 months stay in besieged Mariupol. So Ukraine tries to stand fast and strong. We are feeling the solidarity of the EU countries and NATO countries. Last Madrid summit seems to be a very turning point in the NATO political and military strategy. The European Union recognizes us as candidate state. But what we know for now, we know that this war is a really exhausting war, because Russia had been preparing this war for, as Chancellor of Germany said, more than a year. I guess that much longer. Let me remind you that when Crimean annexation happened, after all the falsified arguments Putin provided, that this is the initiative of local defenders of their original identity, that they are threatened with these Ukrainian radicals like Banderovцы, right sector, and so on and so forth. But soon after the annexation of Crimea and recognition of Crimea as a part of Russian federal state, as a new federal subject, so-called, Putin boldly and with the great self-esteem said that we had prepared this operation more than 10 years in advance. So probably, yes.
Thank you very much. I think you already brought together a lot of different topics here. Yeah, we should not forget that we have more people on the panel, and we would also then like to have a little bit of time for the discussion. So the participants in the webinar, feel free to post it into the chat or in the Q&A.
Sure, I expected 10, 12 minutes, but okay, we can spare time for more discussion.
Yeah,
okay,
let's maybe continue with the first round, and then we'll have a second round, and then we can have a couple of more questions. Yeah,
good.
And I would like to continue geographically with Nadija Afanasieva, who is the director of the Ukrainian Institute for International Politics in Kyiv, and currently joining us actually from Vienna. So thank you very much that you found the time and the space. That explains the background, maybe also you're there. Before I ask you the question, I would also like to take the opportunity to introduce to you Nataliya Vinnykova, who is a professor at the Department of Political Science in the Karazin Kharkiv National University. Nataliya, thank you also for joining us. And now when we go from what Anatoliy has been saying in this groundwork that he laid for the historical development of the situation that we came into, Nadija, you have been in Kyiv on the 4th of February. You stayed there and then had to also adapt to these new realities. How is the situation from your perception, and then also how is it today, especially with the developments up to now?
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for inviting. Thank you very much for such active start of the discussion. Indeed, the history here is very important, and all our participants of these discussions need to know from where all this started. Actually, it was not started on 24th of February. It was started a long ago, and the one in the modern history, it was started in 2014. So we need to understand that we are in the war. I mean, Ukraine is in the war already for 8 years, and we all understand that all these years there were rather hard preparations of this war. From our enemy as well. Hearing a very common this word is rather common in nowadays, and we can hear this from all over the Europe. We can hear this from all the countries which sometimes were not really progressive concerning the relations with Ukraine. We can hear this word from the authorities. We can hear this word from the mass media, from civil society organizations, from experts. And what does it mean for us? In our opinion, this is the common solution of the problem. We definitely understand that Ukraine needs to solve the problem. Like we are on the front line. We can say, but we need to understand that this war is the war of the 21st century. And here is the war of innovations. And I totally agree with Anatoliy, who said that we definitely need to fight with the brains. We need to fight with innovations. We need to fight with the very innovative solutions and be wise in development of our approach to the enemy. We definitely need the military support. You all probably know about these discussions already for permanent. Like, we understand that we will have the victory, but the main topic is when. Like, the faster the better. We will have the rather good explanations why we need this victory faster than ever, because we have, I think Nataliya and region are very on danger about the future of the city, and how can we recover all these cities. Concerning the fronts, I also would like to say that those who are in our discussions need to understand that they are a part of this front. Not only Ukrainians are fighting. We are fighting for the common Europe. We are fighting common world, democratic and innovative world. So understand that your place is wherever you will find yourself. They are good communicators in your country. If you are a journalist or expert or a member of the local authority or a member of the regional authorities, or you are working in the European Commission, any kind of support is desired in terms of communication, because this front need to be our joint, and we need to have the messages are not clear. These messages are used by Russian propaganda, and they are transferred into some weaknesses from the side of the European Union or from the side of Ukraine. We also need to think about the energy security, and here is again the type of innovations. How do we innovate all our systems? How do we connect one to each other? And how do we diversify all our sources and become more independent from Russia? I do know that in the European Commission there are such already discussions that we are rather late with such solutions. We need to, and that's why we need to go faster and faster now to discuss what will be next in our support. And also I wanted to tackle here the migration, probably the migration issue. I really think like here in Vienna, we are discussing the kind of migration and labor market issues, and I just wanted to share with you the fresh idea which came to my mind, that actually, if we are talking about the accession to the European Union, we became the candidate states. Those people, those 6 million and more people who came here, including the children, if we do a very wise approach to their integration into the European Union society, they will come back to Ukraine already Europeans. So it will be rather useful for the Ukrainian society to have such approach within our society, of those people who already understand what does it mean, values and principles of the European Union, and they are the future of Ukraine, and they will build Ukraine and will recover Ukraine for a lot of years. So I think I will stop here, and I definitely would like to participate in the discussion. Thank you, Sebastian, and thank you, Ulrich and Anatoliy.
Thank you, Nadija, for taking the input further here, and we move a little bit further east to Kharkiv, where we have Nataliya joining us, and her. When we talked about what we will be discussing in this first panel, the title that was suggested here was East on Fire, and we'll get a snapshot on the situation, how it currently looks like in this region. Nataliya, please.
Dear colleagues, first of all, let me just say thank you for a chance to participate in this webinar. And I'd like to present a brief overview of the current situation in the eastern regions of Ukraine, where the most destructive actions are taking place right now. I'll try to give three full pictures encompassing territorial, infrastructural, and human perspective of the ongoing war in eastern regions right now. I'd like to notice that in my speech, I will focus mostly on Kharkiv region because there is a decent information from official sources, as regional and local authorities precisely record every act of enemy's aggression and its aftermath. Second, I could provide my own fact-checking by communicating with my colleagues who remained in Kharkiv. So, as you know, starting from 2014, the Russian Federation occupied 7% of the Ukraine territory, including Crimea, Donetsk, and Lugansk region. Control was returned over 9 communities of the Donetsk region and 3 communities of Lugansk region. But since the outbreak of the full-scale invasion in February 24, as of June 24th, according to Ministry for Reintegration Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine, the updated list of territorial communities located in areas of military operations or under temporary occupation, as well as blockade, includes 8 regions. They are territorial communities of Donetsk, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Sumy region. And as already Professor Kruglashov told, 1/5 of the territory of Ukraine is under occupation. While the enemy has numerical advantage. As we already understand, the Lugansk region is mostly likely to be completely occupied in next several days. Back to the Kharkiv. Kharkiv region has tough location as it borders in the northeast with aggressor country, and Kharkiv region is a frontal zone with the territories of Lugansk and Donetsk regions in east and southeast. The fierce battles in Kharkiv region are right now in the northeast from Kharkiv and on the southeast. 1/3 of the Kharkiv region is under enemy's occupation. When we talk about territorial perspective of the war in eastern region, and in particular what aggressors do in occupied territories, there are 3 common tactics. First, what enemies do when they enter Ukrainian cities and villages is they disconnect mobile communication, what they do first, in order to create information vacuum. So people who could not escape from their territories do not have any connections with the whole world. Second, what they do is the creation of local administration, primarily by appointing collaborators in order to form a picture of legitimacy of the authorities. One of the methods of putting pressure on local authorities is the abduction of city mayors. In total, during the war, the occupiers kidnapped 55 officials, of which 30 were mayors. A standard tactic of propagandists is to distribute humanitarian aid for filming television stories, mostly in order to create fake illustrated evidences of locals' loyalty for enemy's media audience and to justify the invasion. Most of the captured towns and villages have no electricity. In the small towns of the Kharkiv region, invaders replace the TV with the propaganda leaflets. In this way, they seek to persuade locals in their humanitarian mission and to accuse Ukrainian military troops in destroying municipal infrastructure. Above that, invaders are taking grain and corn from temporarily occupied territories. As reported by the Ministry of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine, since the beginning of the full-scale war, counter-aggressor has taken away at least 400,000 tons of grain from the occupied territories from Ukraine. Starting from February 24th, there was no single day in the Kharkiv region without missile attacks. As a result, the city of Kharkiv, a large industrial center and the student capital of Ukraine, suffered significant damage. Densely populated residential areas in the north of Kharkiv suffered the greatest damage as a result of missile attack. Due to chaotic shelling of Kharkiv and the region by the occupying forces, more than 4,000 residential buildings were damaged in the region, 97 medical facilities, hospitals, they ruined hospitals, and 427 educational institutions, also the University of Mine, and 62 cultural institutions and 12 industrial enterprises were destroyed in Kharkiv region. 30% of Kharkiv's housing stock is damaged. The stopless missile shelling left 150,000 people in Kharkiv region homeless. According to the declaration of the chief of the Lugansk region military administration that he made in previous week, in Lugansk region, 95% of civil infrastructure is damaged and it hardly can be rebuilt. As you already know, in Donetsk and Lugansk regions, major industrial hubs such as Mariupol and Severodonetsk has been ruined to the core. After outbreak of the war, 3.5 million people had to move from eastern regions. I could divide those who had to move in three categories: forced to displace due to outbreak of the war, internally displaced, those people who moved abroad primarily to the European Union countries, and people who were illegally deported to Russian Federation. According to estimates of the International Organization for Migration, 55% of internally displaced persons are from eastern regions of Ukraine. So do I. Among regions with the highest ratio of internationally displaced are Kharkiv region, it's 21%, Donetsk region 15%, and Lugansk region 5%. Those who moved entirely in the Ukraine territory. According to the statement of Human Rights Commissioner of the Verkhovna Rada, the Parliament of Ukraine, more than 1 million Ukrainian citizens were illegally deported to the territory of the aggressor country, and more than 200,000 of them are children. Due to intense dynamic of the war, it is hard to determine precise number of victims among civilians. Still, according to the report of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, as of June 24, in Donetsk and Lugansk regions, both there were more than 5,000 casualties. 2,700 killed and 3,200 people injured. In Kharkiv region, as of July 4th, today in the morning, it was declared that there were 936 people killed, civilians, in Kharkiv region since outbreak of the full-scale invasion. Just during last week, 30 civilians have been killed. It's information according to Investigation Department of National Police in Kharkiv region. And according to the data provided by the Office of Prosecutor General of Ukraine, as of the morning of July 2nd, more than 984 children were harmed in Ukraine as a result of the full-scale armed aggression of the Russian Federation. And among them, 344 children have been killed and more than 640 were injured. Most affected children were in the Donetsk region, 340, Kharkiv region, 185, Kyiv region, 116, Chernivtsi region, 68, Lugansk region, 61. But we do not know all victims actually. It's just the data we can get right now. According to surveys, most of the internally displaced persons still plan to return home. And according to sociological exit polls, 87% people who were internally displaced, they want to get home back. And to summarize, I would say next that it is too early to make any comprehensive assessment of the consequences of this horrible war and to make any predictions, but it others obvious that it has a large influence and destructive influence, not only on Ukraine, but also on global affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nataliya. I think it's important that we are reminded of what is actually going on each and every day, even if it's, of course, horrible to see and hear it, and very hard to understand what the situation, especially in the eastern part that is heavily affected by the attack of the Russian Federation is like. So thank you very much for joining us and telling us about this. We've already have a question in the Q&A. There is, of course, the possibility to also raise your hand, and you can ask questions in the chat on our YouTube live stream. They will be transferred to me. But before we do this, I would go back to Anatoliy and give him the opportunity to further also comment on what has been said, and also maybe give us a little bit more insight into the situation in Chernivtsi, as we have not been able to talk about this so far.
Thank you, Sebastian, for the chance to have a floor. I'd like to respond to Anna Albulescu's question. I don't know as whether we are right to say that Russia plays, had played a role of an honest broker on the postal
sorry
space.
that I have to intervene again. Then if you want to respond to it, maybe we read out the question, because not everyone in the live stream.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so
I can read it
question...
in loud. So the question is it possible for Russia to restore its legitimacy as peace broker in the post-Soviet space, for example, in Transnistria, and what would this entail? Sorry, I didn't know that it's clear for me and visible, but not so clear for other of our participants. So my response is that I hardly assure that Russia ever been the honest broker on the post-Soviet space. For me, from the USSR time and later, the Kremlin tactics was quite the same. If anybody want to move outside of the USSR and later on from the sphere of influence and control of Moscow, so far, immediately they were exploited a lot of other means, including the separatist movements. The Transnistria is a case. So I'm sure, I studied this issue for decades. I'm sure that there were a lot of problems which finally invoked into the outburst of this country. But Russia did not play a role of the honest broker, and Putin regime was masterful to exploit this, role, status of Russia as a broker, as mediator, including Transnistria, Abkhazia. In brief, could you imagine that Russia guaranteed and repeated many times that Russia respects the territorial integrity of Georgia, including Abkhazia, rebellious Abkhazia, and South Ossetia? Russia troops were there as a peacekeepers. But when Saakashvili tried to restore the authority of Georgia upon the region, as Putin did it upon the Chechnya, it faced with the full-standing Russian army resistance and then movement into the continental Georgia. What was the pretext? The pretext was quite obvious, because we are there, said Mr. Medvedev and Putin together in one voice, to defend our citizens. More than 90% of the local South Ossetians became to be citizens of Russia. So what kind of honesty it is to declare that we are peacekeepers, that we are supporting the peaceful dialogue and the the reconciliation, but in the same time to make this territory first softly a part of the Russian Federation because of the citizens, and later they create this fake state as a South Ossetia with a lot of so-called alliances with Russia. So far, I guess that under the Putin regime, to see a prospect of Russia to be an honest broker is quite fantastic. So far, first of all, we have to see another Russia, another leadership, and another stance of Kremlin towards the domestic and foreign affairs.
Okay, thank you for answering this question. And we have still the open question with regards to Chernivtsi. Few words on this, Anatoliy, maybe?
Yeah. Fortunately enough, I don't know what is the pretext, because of our proximity to the Romanian border. We are bordering with Romania and Moldova. Romania is a member of the UN NATO. We had only 2 missiles trying to reach us. Both were, shot down. So for now, Chernivtsi is so to say, a relatively deep rear of the war. But in the same time, we had a lot of the influx of refugees, and we try our best to support our suffering regions and to support our fronts. And many of my friends, colleagues, and students now are fighters on the Ukrainian-Russian front. So far, Chernivtsi remains a very important point to make Ukraine more closer to the European Union. Especially, we are pleased that now we see the real support from Romania, and our previous sometimes hot debates seems to be over for now. And it is a very good sign that our territory, our region, and our bridges, towards Europe makes us stronger, better, and more consolidated with the European Union and NATO. So in general, situation is quite nothing to compare with Kharkiv, nothing to compare with Lugansk and Donetsk region and with Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. But fortunately enough, I hope that because of that rear status, we are able to help our defenders and to help our country to stand stronger. And in general, it's elusive to be rear, because that the modern weapons could reach whatever region very soon for a couple of minutes.
Thank you very much. So we have already a raised hand. I would give the opportunity then to Georg Krauchenberg, and please also introduce yourself briefly for the wider audience and tell us where the question is addressed to.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yes, because I have no picture. Well, I'm from IDM. There's this general problem that in the media, in the Western media, we talk about the war in Ukraine. Often Russia is not even mentioned. It's always the war in Ukraine or dispute in Ukraine. And shouldn't all the Ukrainian diplomats as well as media experts always refer to the Russian state terrorism, because it is practically terrorism. It is not only a war, soldiers against soldiers, as we have heard. We have all these atrocities against civilians and total destruction of cities. So it is actually a state terrorism. I think the US president referred once to genocide. Okay, this is maybe something what is not the best word, maybe, but state terrorism, it's a fact. So what could we do? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then I would say Nadija and Nataliya can maybe comment on this question, the very important one that was raised, and that how words and how the descriptions shape the discussion here. I think a very interesting thought that is brought into the discussion here, because I think there were a lot of efforts from the Ukrainian official sides to actually not use the special military operation framing from the side of the Kremlin, but rather refer to it as a war, but is there maybe a need to frame it also differently? Nataliya, Nadija.
I probably can start. Yes, thank you. Concerning the concerning the terminology, we definitely need to. I actually tackled a little bit from my first introduction during these discussions concerning the common narratives that we need to develop within the mass media. If we are talking about solidarity, here we also need to be joint and have a joint messages and joint narratives, including with the mass media, which is working in the EU countries and all over the world. We definitely can name. We definitely need to name clear that this is. It could be aggression, it could be war, it could be terrorist attacks, because this war is definitely all these components. We also have the war on the level of cultural destroyment. Like they are destroying our culture as well. They're trying to destroy our identity as well. If we are talking about these questions that Nataliya said about the deportation of Ukrainian people, so here are a lot of points which could be. It's definitely not the special operation, which is usually used by Russia and some of mass media. But what I can say here, I can give you an example. It was also involved Financial Times and Associated Press in March, when the war was just started, and mass media was a little bit lost in all this terminology, how to name all what is happening. All this is aggression, or this is Ukrainian conflict, or this is something else. And the main point is that usually mass media are taking all this information from the official sources. And if we are talking about official sources, it's include official sources from the Ministry of Defense in Russia are also included here. And we all know what are the sources there, what do they say concerning all our situation, what is saying the president, what is saying the other sources of Russia. They continue to consider these sources official, but they are not. So here we need to understand, if we are talking about mass media, I'm not sure if we need to include here authorities and experts and businesses, probably, because I think these categories already understand what is going on. But if talking about mass media, they need to double check, to triple check all the information, and to understand finally that official sources coming from the enemy and from the propaganda ministry are not the official sources anymore.
Thank you very much.
I absolutely agree with Nadija that we can call this or define this as a special operation, as any special military operation has kind of a scale and rational calculations. But what is happening right now, in particular in eastern regions, does not fit in any logical frame even of conquering. So stopless shelling since the February 24th, no single day, destroying infrastructure, transport infrastructure, industrial infrastructure, and mass killing of civilians is not a special operation military. It's kind of a combination of a terrorist attack and a genocide. I agree with this definition mostly, because I can explain. We discuss with my colleagues anytime how can we apply rational assessment what is going on, what they are target, and the common answer: they just came to kill us, to eliminate us. This is no other understanding, another other explanation of what is going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to come back to a point. Yeah, we have also Ulrich in a second. I would like to come back to a point that Nadija has been mentioning with regards to when we look a little bit more in the future and the possibility of using the sort of window of opportunity that is existing now with the idea that you presented for closer approximation to the European Union. Since we want to have regional perspectives on the war, Nadija, I would like to start with you in the sense what can other regions actually contribute to alleviate the situation, especially maybe across the border, as Anatoliy also has mentioned, in Romania, but also Moldova, etc.
Thank you, Sebastian, for question. What I would like to mention here is that we have the war in Ukraine, but we have the Ukraine is big. So as Anatoliy also mentioned, Chernivtsi, for example, and western regions in majority cases, and Kyiv, since Kyiv region since the occupation is more or less able to cooperate. We also need to mention here that we have a lot of businesses who came to Western regions and trying to accommodate somehow in the new realities. They would like to develop themselves. Anyhow, they understand that some of these developments are only, and they will need a window of opportunity for us for cooperation. It could be the Danube transnational program, which now is working on all regions of Ukraine, not only for the as it was before. We can talk about cross-border cooperation projects, and here we have the unique opportunity that businesses who are transferred, for example, from Donetsk businesses who are in these regions which are participating in cross-border cooperation projects, they can actually be a part of the projects and can understand how it works. Because having like Kharkiv region or Donetsk region, having the neighbor on the east as we have now, they even do not understand how the procedures are working within CBC projects, but they have an opportunity to gain this experience, to understand how to develop more and to work together with inclusively with the European Union colleagues as well. The same we can talk about the professional education. Now we have now we will have a big changes in the professional education in Ukraine. I mean that vocational education and training, because of the need of the professions which are on the level of professional education, and we already have the new legislation basis, and it will be developed more further concerning the without pay you can actually educate yourself in a professional education without payment if you would like to be the kind of the state command of such professions. And we are talking here about technical professions which needed for recovery, for very clear activities of rebuilding, recovery of the regions where you can be a kind of very useful in your country, and actually you can have a rather good salary because there is a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ulrich, please.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to bring in or come back to some of the issues also in particular Nataliya was talking about. Thank you, first of all, for all your insights, all three of you. And I would like to know your assessment of some of the dynamics of what we observe right now in terms of the war. First, now we see the more or less full occupation of the Luhansk region. So what kind of repercussions do you expect for your region, for Kharkiv, wider Kharkiv region? We have seen some counter-offensive around Kharkiv, which were quite successful by the Ukrainian army. However, it may now that at least some of the Russian forces may now return back to the Kharkiv region. I don't know how you would assess this. The second issue is there are not so much media coverage, at least in the German media, about what's going on in the Kherson region. So I don't know whether the Ukrainian media are more outspoken about the Ukrainian attempt to reoccupy, to liberate some of the Kherson region. Have you any assessment on that counter-offensive which is taking place since a couple of weeks? And the last point, sorry if I may, is what really strikes me when I follow the events and what's happening in Ukraine is the role of the civil society. So, I mean, how would you see, this role of this civilian population, the civil society in Ukraine, which seems to be very resilient? I mean, of course, people have to flee, people are homeless, people get killed, casualties, and so on. On the other hand, we see and have a lot of reports about how the society is organizing itself in a very powerful way to keep up the resistance, not just supporting the army, but also supporting all different kinds of things, including IDPs and so on. So I would like to hear what is your assessment, what is your observation on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Schneckner. First, about Kharkiv, the perspectives of Kharkiv region. I do hope that counterattacks and counter-offensive of the Ukrainian military troops finally will be a success enough to release the whole region. I do hope for that, but right now it's so aggressive shelling from neighboring region, Belgrade, so they do what they can do right now. As we also have in the southeast hot point, the Izum, where enemy troops trying to go around our military troops. So they need this territory. I mean, enemy troops need this territory and to go further to the Donetsk region as like kind of to occupy the whole Donetsk region. So I think in the next month, I don't see any signs of the escalation in Kharkiv region, but I do hope that perhaps in September, it will be easier. This is about Kharkiv region. I do not have precise information, unfortunately, about Kherson and Kherson region, but I see some achievements in the counter-offensive of the Ukrainian military troops. And today, as perhaps you know, there was our Ukrainian troops put a Ukrainian flag on a Snake Island. So it's it's also a strategical point, and I hope this achievement is a sign that we will, and soon we will return control of the southern territories of the Ukraine. And talking about civil society, yes, the huge support from grassroots organization it is, and I felt it in my own experience. Volunteers help people a lot in the Kharkiv region by organizing evacuation missions. Most evacuation missions have been organized from the hottest point where people can't escape by their own, by volunteers. It is very helpful.
Thank you. We have a couple of more minutes. So if there are any questions, please feel free to type it in or raise your hand. I have a couple of more of them actually. So let's see if we bring this over the time. One of the things that I was wondering with regards to the future of the Ukrainian development in the region is, of course, the big discussion on how Western support, and here especially also when it comes to weapons, is actually organized. And there is a very controversial figure in this overall discussion, the Ukrainian ambassador to Germany, who has been very outspoken, and I think also with his pressure brought a certain development here. But he has been now also criticized from the side of the Ukrainian government, and interestingly enough from the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry about his recent statements with regards also to, for instance, Poland. Anatoliy, how do you see the development with this regard, and also the challenges of maintaining some sort of the balance between pressure that is necessary and also professionalism, despite all the horrible developments that are ongoing?
Thank you, Sebastian. It's really very important and provocative in the same time question, because on the one hand, you're right, our society, our government, our officials are to press our Western allies in the shape of the European Union Solidarity, NATO, and Rammstein format to support Ukraine more, as far as we really faced with a much stronger, much bigger, much more aggressive and well-prepared country in military, economic, financial, whatever sense. And the pity is that part of Ukrainian politicians deny the real threat from Russia. They believe that this war will be limited with the ongoing debates about Donbass and just fast-standing from the reality debates on Crimean Peninsula in the future. But now we have a full-fledged war, and for sure Ukrainian military forces are not comparable, as well Ukrainian economy too. Putin did not succeed to pursue the global community and leaders that Ukraine is a failed state. But Putin tries, as my colleagues mentioned, Nataliya and Nadija mentioned, that Putin ruins our economy, our cities, our infrastructure, and most preachers' lives of our people, their health, their future, their children, and so on. So under these circumstances, this outcry from Ukraine, help us, support us, because we are really on the front line, not only standing for Ukraine, but standing for the future of Europe and global community, at least of democratic countries. So this is a very problematic how to balance professionalism and emotions, demands and thankfulness. That's a very problem. Sometimes it's too much overwhelmed with emotions. Sometimes we really witness the laziness, the certain kind of opportunities of Western leaders, their delay with the critical important support. So far, it is a very unbalanced situation till now. But what is good is that even the lexicon, the rhetoric of Western leaders, including the Chancellor of Germany and our President of France, and so on and so forth, are getting more tough with regard to the estimation of Putin's behavior. And moreover, as we mentioned prior, or with your and me in discussion in the interview for IDM, that the very problem is that the prospect for the peace deal with Russia is quite embarrassed and limited with the opportunity to have this stable peace treaty with Putin's Russia. Unfortunately, for me personally, Putin's Russia is not a part of the truthworthy negotiation process. Until Putin regime will survive, no stable, no foreseeable peace will come neither to Ukraine nor to Europe. Therefore, the purposes of war from the Ukraine and our ally side, it's not just the armistice, just to stop war. It should be much faster, much deeper, and much more scaled purposes, because Putin regime shows up the very aggressive and brutal nature of that political creature. And that threatens not only us Ukrainians, but everybody in Europe and around. So far, I'm very happy that this support grows up. It is very important for Europeans to understand fully that no tiredness of Ukraine should be allowed. We have to stand stronger, united together. Besides, sometimes maybe some excessive words or phrases.
Thank you very much, Anatoliy. Nataliya, from the possibility of prospects of further development, as we're coming to an end with the first panel discussion here, and also maybe linking it then to our second panel, which will draw a bit of a more international assessment of the consequences to it. What would you say is at the current stage that we are in at the moment in this war, something that would be helping in the sense of further support from not only regional but also, of course, international support?
Thank you, Sebastian. I actually do want to stress some ideas. I absolutely agree with Professor Kruglashov that I don't see any rational base to launch negotiations with Putin's regime. I don't see any perspective of success of these negotiations. But right now, I want to say perhaps some paradoxical and unexpected idea. First, we have to understand that it's huge mistake and dangerous illusion to perceive this horrible war and to recognize this horrible war in a distance thinking. You know what I mean? This somewhere, right? And this like location on the eastern part of Ukraine near the border in Russia. No, it's not just a danger for Ukraine, for national security of Ukraine, and not only for European security. It's an issue and it's a matter of global security. And that is my unexpected idea. I do rely on European Union political leaders and civil society in launching negotiation with China. Until Russia intrudes in China's covering its back, it enjoys its permissiveness. We need assertive diplomatic negotiations with China to persuade China to change its so-called neutrality. That's the only point we can rebuild the global balance. This I wanted to tell you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nataliya. Nadija, yes, a different aspect into the discussion that goes beyond regional cooperation involving China in a further stabilization attempt here. If you want to comment on it, feel free to it, but I have an additional last question with regards to the potential of the European integration process, especially because you have been involved also in providing answers for that for the question that it was crucial that Ukraine became a candidate. These negotiation processes are very long and dreadful, especially when we look at the recent history of European integration. You mentioned these other cooperations, so the sectoral integration. Do you see this as a potential that would help to foster the situation for Ukraine in the overall perspectives on this war?
I think for us, this is now a must. and not only for us, but for our European friends, European partners as well. Because as we usually are telling to our partners, if we lose this war, you will be the next. So here is the issue, not helping Ukraine, but going together and working together. We definitely understand that we need to move forward. We have a very clear agenda, being a candidate country, that we need to implement reforms. We definitely understand that not all the reforms could be implemented during the active phase of the war. But at the same time, some of the paths, some of the strategies, some of the visions we already need to discuss. We definitely need to discuss the priority of recovery. And today, you probably know that we have a rather big event in Lugano on the recovery Ukraine. This is a very high-level discussion concerning the presentation of the facilities of the vision of the European Commission and vision of Ukraine concerning what is going on in our vision. What do they think that we need to support? We definitely know that the cabinet of ministries now is going to the some very creative approach, some innovative approach. We definitely need to forget all what was done before by the Soviet traditions and different other things. We need to think for the future. We need to think outside the box. This is the unique opportunity for us. If I can say that war is the opportunity, it is now. Otherwise, our society, our society now is showing this, that all this mobilization of the civil society, and not only the civil society organizations, I mean here, each person who is inside Ukraine, who is outside Ukraine, almost everybody understand what they need to do, that we need to support. And I think like after the 2 weeks of the invasion, everybody of us understood where is the place for everybody and how they can improve the situation. Whether it could be some expert support, whether it could be volunteer work, whether if you are like military, you are experienced military or professional, you can go and defend your country. So these are very wide place to hear. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I hope I answered your question, because I think I haven't had your question about the Kyiv use this time. Kyiv is now more or less okay. I just I'm in Vienna for only several days. I live in Kyiv now since the early May.
Yeah, Nadija, but also Nataliya and Anatoliy, thank you so much for these insights. I think we learned a lot, especially that we must not forget that this is not something that suddenly happened, but has a much longer history, and that this conflict that turned into a war, whatever we will ultimately call it, cause suffering, cause pain, and also provide opportunities. And I think with these regional perspectives from Ukraine, from different parts in Ukraine, we have a very interesting basis for the second panel to talk about other regional perspectives. We have another great panel prepared here. I hope you can stay with us so we can continue the discussion later on. But in any case, thank you also for the questions from the audience, and we'll have a very brief 9-minute break until 16:30 CEST, respectively 17:30 EEST. And thanks a lot again to all three of you, and see you in 8.5 minutes.
Thank you for your bright moderation. Thank you, my colleagues, for the bright contributions made. Thank you. See you soon.
Okay, I guess it's on me now. So welcome back, everyone.
Thank you.
I hope you could use the small break for, like Mihai did, for a glass of water or a cup of tea. So we will now continue with our webinar with the second panel. And I have the privilege to be the moderator of this second round. I'm still looking a bit until Andreas is also back in the room. Now he's there. Very good. Yeah, so we have heard in the first round our colleagues and friends from Ukraine, from different parts of Ukraine. We also see that the war in Ukraine has, of course, an impact on the entire country and the entire society. However, it affects the country in different ways, in different forms, in different regions. So I think this also became quite clear. We will now look a little bit beyond the situation in Ukraine and try to discuss a bit the wider implication, the wider regional and European implication of this war against Ukraine. And here I'm very glad that I'm joined by three panelists we have gathered together. And I like to introduce you first before we jump to the first topic. And I think I like to address you also in the order I would like to have you speaking. So I start with Mina Orlander. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
Mina is of Finnish origin, and she's based in Germany now since a couple of years, and she is working at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, well, better known as SWP, Berlin, so the biggest German think tank on international affairs and security policy. She's working within the research group on European affairs since 2019. Before she graduated from the Free University of Berlin with a master in international relations. I shall say that Mina is very active on Twitter. So if you don't follow her account, please do so now, because she has really done a great job, in particular bringing in the perspective from the Nordic and the Baltic countries. So there are a number of threads she was building up over the past months, which were really informative about, in particular, these debates, the internal debates in Finland and Sweden. And I think she will also address or bring in this more Nordic or Baltic dimension of the war and of the wider implications in this regard. Secondly, I'd like to welcome very much Professor Mihai Răzvan Ungureanu from Bucharest. Mihai has a long career in politics and diplomacy and science. He has been the Romanian foreign minister from 2004 to 2007. He also was a Romanian prime minister, I guess in an interim period, early 2012. He has been also the director of the Romanian Foreign Secret Service, I think twice in 2 periods. And before he now rejoined academia and works now as professor at the Romanian Center for Russian Studies at the University of Bucharest. I hope I have not missed any other important details, but I think you can add whatever you want. Welcome very much. And the third in our panel is Andreas Umland. Andreas Umland is based now at the moment in Germany, but that's actually unusual for Andreas. And because Andreas is, I would say, one of the best and knowledgeable experts on Ukrainian politics, because he is based in Kyiv since 2002 and has followed virtually everything concerning Ukrainian affairs since then and even before. He has specialized on the Soviet and the post-Soviet space in most of his writings and academic work. He got actually 2 PhDs, one in politics and one in history, if I'm not mistaken. And he has a lot of different affiliation. I'm not going into all of them, but I just mentioned the most recent one, that he's now with the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs in Stockholm. And he is also the editor of, I think many of us know this, book series on Soviet and post-Soviet politics and society. So I think also a well-known book series with important contribution, background contribution, actually what we're observing right now as well. So also welcome to you, Andreas. Great to have you all here. And yeah, in this order, I like to start, and we have agreed that each of you does a little input in the first round on your assessment of the situation, in particular regarding some of the regional implications. But from there, we would also, look beyond this, even the wider European implications of the war, and how would we assess them, in particular also after this series of summits we have observed over the last weeks, which I think also made the shape of what's coming up more visible, more tangible. So I really wonder, what is your take on this? And I would call upon Mina to give us her view first.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. It's a great pleasure to talk here, and I also enjoyed. I mean, enjoy is not really the right word to use in this context, but I found the previous panel also very interesting and informative, and it's very important that we have these discussions right now and on a regular basis. Actually, I would like to start with something that came up in the earlier panel regarding like what do media speak about, or how do media call this? Do they speak of a war in Ukraine, which kind of like obfuscates Russia's role, or is it called by its name? So actually, since I follow, like especially Finnish media, also some Swedish media and German media, there is a like great contrast between Finland and Germany, in the sense that in Finland all the live feeds on the news apps and so on, like in all the main media, it's always about Russia's attack. It only says Russia's attack. That's what it's about. It's there's no this clarity about about it. And the contrast is that in Germany, most of the media do speak of a war in Ukraine. Some occasionally maybe Russia's war in Ukraine, but mostly war in Ukraine. So that is a good observation, but I would just like to bring in this a little bit more hopeful perspective that there are also countries who do recognize the situation as for what it is. Actually, this is indeed this is a totally pivotal moment for Finnish security, for regional security in the Nordic-Baltic region. In Finland, it is absolutely clear that also our future depends on the outcome of this war. Our future security depends on the outcome of this war, whether it is absolutely crucial, and Finns understand that Russia can't be rewarded with anything like any territorial gains or other face saving or whatnot. So there were some polls lately that are maybe interesting in this sense. There was an ECFR poll with 10 European states, where the question was who is the biggest obstacle to peace in Ukraine, and Finland had with 95% the clearest view that it is Russia and not somehow Ukraine, EU or NATO. And also, like in a domestic poll, in domestic polls of the past months, more than 90% of Finns think that Russia is a military threat, and an expansion is great power that is also very unstable and unpredictable. So when you look at this data, then you understand better why the change in the public opinion in Finland was so swift on the NATO membership. For decades, Finland used to follow this more cautious approach on Russia, trying to maintain good relations because of the very long border we have with Russia, more than 1,000 kilometers. So the idea was to avoid any costly tensions at that very long border, but it became absolutely clear already, basically 2014, it became clear that Russia is definitely increasingly again a threat. And since then, both Finland and Sweden started already investing even more in their bilateral defense cooperation, strengthening the Nordic defense cooperation. There was this, since 2014 in the Nordic region, there's increasingly this shared threat perception of Russia as the main security challenge in the region, which has led to the overall intensification of this Nordic defense cooperation format called NORDEFCO. And so maybe the point is that what this has led to is great solidarity with Ukraine. The Finns are following the developments very, very closely. It's interesting because there was this strategic analysis made in Finland 20 years ago about the kind of a foresight analysis. What are the likely threat scenarios facing Finland? All of them had to do something with Russia, and these have been very largely confirmed in the way that Russia wages war currently in Ukraine and against Ukraine. So, for example, let me give just an example. We see that Ukraine is constantly exposed to massive artillery fire from Russia at the front that is over 1,000 kilometers long. So then you understand that it's no coincidence that Finland has one of the strongest artilleries in Europe with our border to Russia that is over 1,000 kilometers long. But that said, obviously the greatest, that there are some really historic shifts happening in the security architecture of the Nordic-Baltic region right now, with the Finnish and Swedish NATO membership process or the accession process. Just today, apparently Finland finalized the accession protocol or the accession negotiations. It took only one day, and the protocol will be signed tomorrow. And this will be an absolute game changer in the Baltic Sea region, as well as the Arctic region, because so far Finland and Sweden remained outside of NATO, which kind of made the security architecture of the region quite fragmented. So there were because some members, for example, of the NORDEFCO were EU members but not NATO members, and then others were NATO members but not EU members, thinking of Norway and Iceland, and Denmark, for example, has been member in both organizations but had this opt-out in EU for security and defense policy, which was scrapped now, which is also significant because Denmark has a lot of opt-outs, and scrapping this one now is very indicative of how seriously all the Nordic countries take the situation and this threat to their security. So once Finland and Sweden will access NATO as full members, it will increase or make it easier to, for example, defend the Baltics, and it will harmonize the security architecture of the Baltic Sea region, notably. One thing that is also quite important, especially from the NATO view, is that Finland and Sweden will kind of widen the Arctic dimension of NATO. Norway is already a NATO member and has significant Arctic regions, but it will become much larger with Finland and Sweden. And the Arctic region is very, very crucial for Russia, for Russian economy, for example. Approximately 80% of the natural gas that is now that Russia is now using or exporting is in the Arctic region, and Russia also has built up its military presence and infrastructure in the past 10 years, notably in the Arctic region, especially on the Kola Peninsula, where Russia has the majority of its nuclear capacities, maritime nuclear capacities, and a very strong second strike capacity, or basically Russia's nuclear second strike capacity is based on that peninsula. So that is the Arctic is a very, very significant region, and it will be increasingly also a problem, but I think it needs to get more attention and be more in focus now that we have this situation, because until now none of the wars that Russia started had this grave impact on this region. It used to stay kind of outside of those other wars, like Georgia or with Crimea 2014. None of those had this severe impact on the Arctic cooperation, which is completely on hold right now, and it will be quite an elephant in the room and quite a significant problem going forward. So this has not only a huge impact on the regional security of the Baltic Sea region, but for the whole wider Baltic Sea, North Atlantic, Arctic region. So maybe that's all for me right now, and we'll discuss later on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mina, and also great that you also brought in the Arctic dimension as well. Indeed, this is sometimes often overlooked. How the changes will develop from there. Can I have one quick comment from you before I hand over to Mihai? Since you're based in Berlin, there was a lot of talk before the war, but even now, still in some corners of our Twitter bubbles about the Finlandization of Ukraine. I mean, it was misleading from the very beginning, of course. Yeah. And now when Finland is de-Finlandized, I mean, maybe you have some quick thoughts about this, because it seems to be a topic which for some reason is still occupying some minds in the German discourse all the time about this, as a possible option. Before the war, it was much stronger, of course. However, there's still this idea at the end the Ukraine must be neutralized militarily, at least, and Finland still being like a blueprint for this, still Finland being an EU member, not being NATO member, at least until now. So it is often seen as a model. I personally don't believe in this by no means, but how would the Finnish view on how is the Finnish view on this debate?
Honestly, like all the Finns were like absolutely like amazed and shocked that it was like floated around as a serious suggestion, because like it is an absolutely terrible idea. It is nothing like it was a historical period for Finland, which was in a way the lesser evil. Like there were like two bad options, and it was like the lesser one. But we definitely don't wish it for anyone else. Also, it wouldn't work in any other context, because you have to look at the historical context, how Finlandization came about. It came about after the Winter War, which took place in 1939 to 1940 between Finland and the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union tried to invade Finland and failed. So the point was that Finland was able to fend off this attack. And although in a way Finland didn't win the war, in the sense that Finland did have to cede some territories from eastern parts of Finland to the Soviet Union at the end of it, nevertheless, it was very significant that Finland managed to avoid its Baltic neighbors' destiny or fate as Soviet satellite state, and in a way Finland earned some respect back then. And I think that Finlandization only worked because there was this minimum amount of respect that you can't just roll over Finland just like that, that they will definitely fight and defend themselves. So I don't think that Russia ever had that minimum amount of respect towards Ukraine. That is my strong impression, at least like when you look at this like the Russian narrative, what they are doing in Ukraine, and when you look at like what they're actually doing, like it's pretty obvious that there's absolutely no respect for whatsoever. In Finland, there's like this very strong sentiment that obviously any like international agreements you enter into with Russia are not worth the paper they are signed on. Because like Russia is absolutely unreliable and can't be trusted to, like, just look at the Budapest memorandum and so on. So it is an entire mystery to me why some people think that this could work on any level with someone like Russia. And I think this is the very common fallacy in German thinking, that they still have a somehow like romanticized view of Russia, also this kind of like special relationship. And there is this idea that well, also this kind of very problematic like ignoring the agency of the whole neighborhood between Russia and Germany, and the agency of those states, and not really understanding the history of these states with Russia, and how different it is than the German experience with Russia. So I could go on about this, but maybe I stop here.
But thank you. I think this is it's still since this topic comes over and over again. Also, maybe it's a very German discussion in it all. But it also, I think, is a signifier. This whole Finlandization. It's more like a colonial view, I would say, a colonial metaphor.
Yes, and it has to do with this German kind of pacifism, which is like, you can really like debate whether it's really any real pacifism, but they like to think so.
Okay, but maybe we come back to that. And now over to Mihai, to a complete different part of Europe, which I think is also very much affected by the war, and also by the more recent decisions of the European Union, not only granting candidate status to Ukraine, but also to Moldova, which I think is very significant also for Romania. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Yuriy, and thank you very much for having me with you, with Andreas, who's a longtime friend of mine, and to Mina. Just a coda to what Mina just said. Finlandization is basically another way of saying, another way of denominating neutralizing or neutralization, so to say, because as you well know, Finland had a sort of a contorted history after 1940, after the end of the Winter War, joining the Axis for a while, and leaving then the Axis in 1944, but with good advocates on her behalf, both in Yalta and in Potsdam later on. Marshal Mannerheim's Finland escaped the clutches of war, and with the price of neutrality, succeeded to be what it is, what's been for the past 60 years, if I'm counting them well or more. So I wouldn't think Finlandization with such a too much of a passion, a negative passion about its meaning. But it's been an enigma, frankly speaking, because it was the only country that joined the Axis with no problems whatsoever in the aftermath of the war. Among the other countries, like myself, my country, Romania, or other countries who then became members of the Soviet bloc, the situation wasn't so sunny by the end of the 1940s. Now, coming back to what Ulrich offered me to speak about, February 24th took Romania by surprise. And I will not draw too much onto this. It took by surprise, now invoking a specific part of my life. It took Europe by surprise to very much to the extent that intelligence was faulty, or it never reached the ears of political decision makers in the sense that would have prepared Europe far before 2014 to understand that Putin was serious in the sense of following his own philosophy in terms of international relations. He was very honest. He was always expressing his mind with no veil over it whatsoever. We tried, and come back to Mina. Yes, it is about a romanticized image of what Russian Federation was about since 2000, since year 2000, the first year of Putin's presidency. When the war broke out, there was a sort of a shattering tsunami throughout Romania and mostly in the executive. Everybody was taken apart. Was taken apart by the force of the onslaught, and for 2 or 3 days, there was basically, like in a psychological process, it was a denial of reality. Nobody would have ever considered that the crossing of the border by large military formations of Russia was real. So it was like a sort of a continuation of a play that was already going on beyond the borders of Ukraine, namely in Belarus. Things started look serious 48, 70 hours after February 24th. And the second tsunami happened in Chisinau. That was the moment when people started waking up. Now, taking into account what's happening today, I tend to say that the Republic of Moldova, in spite common knowledge or perceptions, is no prey to the Russians, at least for the moment. It does not exist on the map of strategic military moves. On one hand, it's too small a country. It's less important than Ukraine, needless to say, has basically no particular strategic significance, nothing to offer, but a large headache, because it has a border with a country which is at the same time politically and culturally body to it, and that's Romania. And that's a border, that's a NATO border and the European Union border as well. Secondly, Moldova is, as I said, far away, too small and too weak a country. It's a country that barely can support itself, with an economy that's been weakened, not just by the war, but by the years of pandemia and energy crisis. Its economy is reeling from the pandemic and energy crisis, with a huge inflation, economic stagnation, a corruption, which is more than structurally, is very systemic, with disrupted supply chains, weak institutions, and very paradoxically a dynamic political life, domestic political life, but whose energy is not consumed into projects that would bring something positive to the country. Moldova is, as I said, is not a target, cannot be a target. It could be a headache, but not a target. Besides, economically, Moldova is dependent, quite largely dependent to Russia in terms of energy, in terms of food exports, in terms of labor force. It's in a way, it's something that would not account for a prime position in the list of targets Russia has prepared some good years ago, maybe 10 years ago. There are, however, potential dangers. We can speculate on them, and from Bucharest as well from Brussels, they can be quite easily seen. The first is the situation of Transnistria. I was surprised to understand in the past months from friends in Chisinau and elsewhere in the Republic of Moldova, from different polls that have been made by various NGOs addressing social changes, internal social changes, that what happened in the early 90s with the Transnistrian conflict, which involved both Russians and Ukrainians, that is at the level of their executives, Moscow and Kyiv, has not been forgotten in Moldova. So Moldova has a sort, I would say the intellectual milieus have still a sort of I would say balanced and delicate and nuanced position about what's happening between Kyiv and Moscow. It's a quarrel between friends, former friends, and quarrel between brothers. We Moldovans, we should keep ourselves aside. If there'll be a change of regime in Kyiv, which would dramatically alter the pro-European, pro-Occidental stance of the actual executive, then Kyiv would start fearing the worst. That is basically the issue. And Moldovans are not just looking now, or Chisinau is not looking now at the Russian military advances in the east of Ukraine, or maybe in the south as well, as they're looking towards what's happening in the executive power buildings in Kyiv, who are likely to be successors of Zelensky, who are likely to be successors of the ministers who are in charge with powerful ministries. That is the most important fear in Chisinau in this moment, leaving the economic problems aside. Transnistria, coming back to Transnistria, Transnistria has a sort of a dual political regime. So half, I cut the corners now. Half of those who are implied in politics are the so-called reformists. So they'll try to keep the temperature even with Chisinau and with Moscow, with no implications on any side whatsoever. And those who are, let's say, the tough half, parts of the radicals, who are ready at any situation given, any opportunity given, to join the Russian advance. That was the reason why, on the with the background of clashes between those two opposite forces in Transnistria, this is why we witnessed some weeks ago different unusual happenings in Tiraspol, for example. Some grenades exploding here and there, some explosive packages without any apparent sense. Basically, there was part of the quote-unquote dialogue between those factions, which are oppositely to each other. So Chisinau is again fearing of a change of regime, a dramatic change of regime in Kyiv under the supervision of Moscow, apparently. And what could the consequences be in Tiraspol and from Tiraspol into Chisinau? The Republic of Moldova is by far a very fragile state. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nicu Popescu, acknowledged this some weeks ago, and I quote him: "A fragile state in a very difficult region," which is, it's adding an ailment to another ailment, and makes people who visited Chisinau, for example, like the UN Secretary Guterres, to say the same. It's the worst fragile neighbor to Ukraine. So it doesn't take a military action to put Moldova on the brink of disaster. It's enough to work here and there with economic leverages, not political leverages, and bring Moldova to a difficult situation, crossing the red line. Besides, please do not forget that it is a country whose more than half of its apt labor population has left the territory of their native country for Western countries. So it's bereft of young and professional people, mature and experienced individuals who might have contributed in a way or another to the benefit of Moldova. Besides, it's a country with two powerful minorities. I leave the Gagauz aside and others, the Russians and the Ukrainians. And they're both active, and they both have deep connections with Kyiv, respectively with Moscow. The way Chisinau deals, for example, with hot potatoes like the national language, national official language, the things that would echo in our mind with similar situations in Ukraine in the past years, in the past 3 presidential mandates, if you want, from Poroshenko to Zelensky, are still difficultly tackled with, simply because the level of sensitivity is pretty high. In Transnistria, those who speak Romanian as mother tongue are equal in terms of in nominal figures with the Russians. And the Ukrainians are very close to those two leading, let's say, not minorities, because they're making up to something like 33%. They're not over 50, none of them. So it's a sort of a tripartite minority communities territory, sorry. And this adds to the very complicated image of Transnistria's relations with Chisinau on one side, Kyiv on the other side, and further along Moscow. Now, in terms of the candidature to the European Union, I'm glad I was very glad not to hear the news, but also to the very prudent and, in my position, politically well-built declarations President Maya Sandu uttered. And I think I can quote her quite well. We are not going, we Moldovans, the Moldovans, we are not going to jump over the calendar, which is a very well-poised declaration. It means that, at least in Chisinau, those who are now in the executive, including the president and the majority of the parliament, they're all aware that candidatureship to the European Union is a difficult exam. And it's in fact a succession of exams, which would prove the very capacity of Moldova to undertake such a project, which is a long-haul project. It's nothing happening over Monday, over weekends. It entails structural reforms, profound structural reforms from each sector of the establishment and the society. Reforms of large dimensions that should be carried out with coherence, with an attitude of coherence, with creativeness, and they all entail risky electoral positions. And sometimes they could bring down governments. And it never happened with the countries which are now members of the European Union, new or old members of the European Union, who went through this kind of hurdles. But with a country like Moldova, a change of government, from a change of regime from one who is pro-Occidental, pro-Western, to one who'd lean its ears to Moscow, that makes a fundamental difference in the very status of the country itself. So this is one thing. And I hope the Republic of Moldova will have the energy and, let's say, the sturdiness to keep the course. This is important. It's not about running 100-meter lead. It's about running a marathon. And I hope they understand this. Second, they also understand that the status of candidate is reversible. Once they would not fill in the boxes with the right answers, this status vanishes. It's nothing cemented. Membership could be cemented, although we have an example where membership has been reversed into something else, which is the Brexit. But otherwise, membership is cemented in itself, and it makes a country, in terms of its membership, belonging almost forever to the European Union, for as long as the European Union exists. And then it's about the closeness to, 1 minute only, Ulrich. It's about the closeness to the European Union. It's about a change of mindset. Mindsets are very important because they generate the attitude and they generate the position of the masses towards this kind of project. And it's about generations in a way. And finally, and I will conclude with this, future designs of security arrangements and mechanisms, I cannot find one possible. For as long as there is no trust, because trust is what stays in the foundations of our security mechanisms and arrangements. If we have different, and it is the case today, we sport different ethical and normative narratives. The Western countries, members of NATO, EU, and Russia, on the other hand, and which makes our dialogue completely impossible. Certainly, we need to be creative, but I'm still looking how can a paradoxical situation of this kind turned into creativity. Because if we need to expect from Russia to suddenly change, for example, when Putin will not exist anymore, will not be in power anymore, that would be a false harbinger of policies. Finally, we should understand, and this is also what Moldova understands, that old mistakes should not be repeated. That is, we should keep our ears open and our skin very sensitive. Thank you, Ulrich, and thank you all of you, Mina and Andres.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mihai, also for illustrating us this interesting and to some extent, very complex universe of Moldova and Transnistria. In a way, it reminds me that also Transnistria has sometimes used in this debate about Ukraine. When I look back to 2014, the occupied separatist Donbas region, there was a lot of talk about whether we see a second Transnistria here, something like this. So this also figures quite prominently in this whole description and analysis of the conflict zones in the wider region. I think we come back to some of this European prospects, but first I would like to bring in Andreas. Andreas, since you are an observer of both Ukrainian and German politics, I guess you may also say a few words on how you perceive the development of the relationship between the two countries, what you make out of the more recent developments regarding some visits, particularly from Chancellor Scholz to Kyiv, and whether you see how the Ukrainian perceive German politics and vice versa. I don't know whether you would like to talk a bit on that, but also maybe you can also alert us a little bit to the wider region, Eastern Europe, but maybe more like the post-Soviet space. So because I guess there are also repercussions in other post-Soviet states, which really carefully and closely observe what Russia is doing in Ukraine.
Yes, thanks, Ulrich. I suspect that in a way Minna might be better qualified actually to comment on the Berlin's scene and how things are seen there. But perhaps I'll start with, as Mihai was commenting on Finlandization, also with this topic when I'm trying to explain to German friends what the problem with Finlandization in concerning Ukraine is. That sounds better in German than in English, is that Russia or Russland does not see Ukraine as Finland, but Russia or Russland sees Ukraine as Russland. And you know, and that's the big problem. And in a way, what we have now is an attempted Russlandization, if you want, of Ukraine, and that's also one of the reasons, I think, the sort of deeper reasons why this is called a special operation, because you can't wage a war against yourself. You know, this is just one part of Russia, right, fighting another part of Russia, and the fight can here only be a special operation, a cleansing of this infiltrated, decadent, subverted part of Russia, its liberation, its bringing back to the Russian homeland. That is also one of the reasons that it's called a special operation. Although Russians see Ukraine, or at least eastern Ukraine, southern Ukraine, as a part of Russia, and perhaps against this background, people in Moldova and especially in Transnistria are looking with some you know, nervousness what's happening in Kyiv, in the presidency, in the ministries, and so on. The effect, of course, of this so-called special operation has been exactly the opposite. It reminds me actually what is now happening in Ukraine of an old saying in political science, which goes like, not only do nations make war, but wars make nations. And what we have now, if you look at the opinion polls, is a unification in terms of the geopolitical orientation, the national orientation of the regions of Ukraine. We had these divisions earlier between the Russophone regions, the Ukrainophone regions, and that, you know, I mean, that is everybody sees that and knows that the effect of Putin's special operation is exactly the opposite from what it is announced, or at least in Russia announced to be. It's actually a sort of a Ukrainization, if you like, of Ukraine, and therefore I think there should be no nervousness in Moldova or Transnistria or wherever what the orientation of Ukraine is going to be. I think this is basically, this is now a done deal, that Ukraine is going to be Western oriented. If there ever was any sort of open question about that, this question has now been closed in the last 4 months. The German position has changed for the better, as Mina may agree as well. It's not changing to the degree and with the speed that one would have hoped for on the 27th of February when Scholz made this historical speech in the Bundestag. When I'm asked about this issue of the insufficient help of Germany for Ukraine, in particular concerning heavy weapons, I usually, and I wonder also what Minna says about this, or Ulrich, what you may have your thoughts about this, that this is not so much a sort of a lingering pro-Russianness or lingering pro-Putinism or Putin understanding or Russian understanding, and even less so some Ukrainophobia, hidden Ukrainophobia, but this is rather a result of the fact that we are now, as Germans, entering a new field of foreign policy that we were not very much engaged in before February 2022. So our classical fields of foreign policy were diplomacy, cultural exchange, infrastructure projects, scientific cooperation, economic investment. This is what we usually do in our foreign policy. And now suddenly we have to take part in a geopolitical conflict in Europe, on a territory that was once occupied by the Wehrmacht. We are asked to provide not just weapons, but heavy weapons, offensive weapons also. And that's something that we are not good in, because we've never done that before, at least not to this degree. And that's why it's happening with so many contradictions and so slow. And that we also have, of course, our own problems with our own military. That's also what I'm usually saying, the Ukrainians, that this sort of rather positive image that Germany has in Ukraine about German industry and effectiveness and technology and so on does not actually apply to our own army. We may have a good arms industry, but oddly, we don't have a very well-equipped army on our own. So, and that's why. But maybe you would give it another interpretation. I would be actually interested in that. The paradox here of the German position, I would say, is that there is this reluctance to provide, on the one side, heavy weapons to Ukraine, but also a reluctance to extend actually serious security guarantees to Ukraine. And then the question is, but what's then the plan for Ukraine? You don't give it, you're not ready to extend NATO or the European Union or some sort of new structure or some sort of bilateral security guarantees to Ukraine, but you are also not ready, or at least a part of German society and also a part of the German elite is not ready to provide heavy weapons. So what's then the plan, actually? Then this is the paradox. I think that is also something that could be emphasized more, that it's either or. Either you take Ukraine in and you put the sort of umbrella that Germany is also under over Ukraine, or you provide Ukraine with sufficient weapons to defend itself. That's what sometimes called in Ukraine the sort of Israeli model. So that you are in a hostile environment and you actually take care by yourself of your security with Western help, in the Israeli case, with above all American help. And that's, I think, what's going to be actually the most realistic option for Ukraine in the next years. The problem here is that that there seems to be an emerging consensus what the West should do as long as the war goes on. And it's also clear what will happen to Ukraine in the long term, namely entering the European Union and NATO. There are now membership perspectives for both of these organizations. But what is happening in the interregnum, in the midterm, between, let's say, a ceasefire that we all hope for and the accession to the EU and NATO, what's going to happen then? That is, I think, still unclear, and that is, I think, what we should be discussing about. And here, I'm afraid this sort of Israeli model is actually the most feasible from my point of view. If the colleagues here have other opinions on that, see other options, I would be actually very much interested in. So, and that's why there's actually a very good argument to be made that Ukraine needs heavy weapons, not just for the war. Ukraine also needs weapons for the peace and to protect itself for the next years until it finally enters then NATO and the EU. And then perhaps once it is either in the EU or in NATO or in both of them, then you can actually then Ukraine can relax and can maybe not be as well armed as it should be for the next years. Then there's also here, I think, a need to develop all sorts of other organizations and links that could perhaps help to embed Ukraine already before it enters the EU and NATO. The obvious candidate here is the 3 Cs initiative, where Ukraine is now what I think it's called now a partnering country, something like that. But Ukraine actually wants to be a member country of the Three Seas initiative. And actually, I don't know what your feeling is, but I think it could actually happen once the Marshall Plan starts, and once a lot of money flows into Ukraine, Ukraine may actually become interesting for its EU neighboring countries, because then there may be actually money that, you know, countries like Poland and Slovakia and Hungary and perhaps even Romania could benefit from, because as it sounds now, there may be a lot of money soon in Ukraine, and then this could be then used for the projects of the Three Seas initiative in the infrastructure and energy sphere. So that is something to go for. Then there is a sort of special relationship developing with certain countries that Ukraine should take advantage of. The classical partner here is of course Poland. There's now this talk about a sort of axis, but not just between Warsaw and Kyiv, but also perhaps including London. As a country that has, for one reason or another, I'm actually not yet quite sure why exactly, but Great Britain has taken an enormous interest, I would say, considering how far the two countries are from each other. In Ukraine is, you know, making lots of noise, at least, perhaps also for domestic reasons, in favor of Ukraine. There's also this sort of special relationship, I would say, in connection with the Eastern Partnership with Poland and Sweden and Ukraine. There is also recently a rather interesting special relationship developing with Turkey, with you know, Turkey supporting Ukraine with arms. Now there's this rumor that Turkey has actually, I'm not sure whether you have also heard of this and whether that is true, that Turkey has seemingly taken under control a Russian shipment of stolen grain on a, as far as I've heard, Kazakh ship. That would be an interesting development, how Russia will react to this. So all of these ties are certainly to be developed. Maybe Guam can be sort of also reburned, the association trio, the Lublin Triangle. All of these things can only be supported because they can help Ukraine to get over this interregnum, as I would call it, the intermediate period between the ceasefire and the accession to NATO. And Ukraine, and actually, as Miha is sitting here, I would also say that it would be great, of course, if Romania also could get more into it. I'm somewhat sort of you know, sad about the, I would say, still underdevelopment of relationships between Romania and Ukraine. Although Romania is a very, you know, pro-Western transatlantic country, as much as Poland, and also perhaps even more pro-European than Poland. But unfortunately, the relations between Ukraine and Romania, as I see them, are underdeveloped. They simply the geographical closeness would suggest that there should be closer relations, actually. But for instance, I was at the SPSA a couple of years ago, the School of Political Science and Administration in Bucharest, and I was told, I asked explicitly about that there's not, apparently it has a, if I remember correctly, something like a few thousand, perhaps 6,000 students, and it's like the major public policy, public administration, and political science school of Ukraine, as far as of Romania, as far as I understood. And when I asked about Ukrainian students, I was told there was actually a few years ago not a single Ukrainian student at this institution, and vice versa. I've only very rarely met, if at all, Romanian students in Kyiv. So you know, that is something that that should change. And as you know, of course, thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Ukrainian students are now studying in Poland, and I would guess there are even more students, Ukrainian students, in Hungary than in Romania. That is at least the impression that I got. So so yeah, Ukraine has for the next years, once the war ends, I hope sometime later this year, the task, and the West has also the task to bring Ukraine through this period until NATO and the EU will enlarge. That will be a very difficult period, and there one has to maybe be creative also in thinking about formats and structures and solutions that apply for. The same goes also, I would think, for Moldova to bring these gray zone and Georgia to bring these gray zone countries eventually into the major organizations. And maybe I'll finish on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is an important point, of course, and there is some thinking starting about this interim period. On the other hand, I had always the feeling in the past weeks, I don't know whether you share that it was somehow somehow surreal, surrealisme à la Bruxelles. On the one hand, we had this very high hopes and very passionate talks about Ukraine and also Moldova getting the candidate status, and at the same time, we have the killing and dying in the war in Ukraine, what we just heard in the first panel. So I think these seem to be two different worlds in a way, and it's very difficult to bring these together somehow, because on the one hand, I think it is really important, it has been a very important symbol of solidarity and of support for the Ukrainian, in particular for the civil society, that they got this message from Brussels. On the other hand, it's still so abstract. So, I mean, it's very concrete when it comes to measures and to policies and so on. And Ukraine is not starting from zero here, of course. But it's still a very abstract goal, and it's not clear what would be the interim steps until the enlargement finally could take place. And at the same time, you have a war to win. You have a war to sustain. Yeah. And I think it's very difficult to bring. I think for our Ukrainian audience, it must be even more difficult. But also for us, I think it's already difficult to bring these two things together. And here I probably would. I also grateful, Andreas, that you brought in the different links Ukraine has developed in the region and so on. And here maybe a question, as long I don't get other questions from the audience or nobody makes me aware of. There's a hand up. But maybe I first ask my question to maybe it's to Mina first, and then we take the question from the floor. Because do you think there is a shift in the dynamic of European politics, integration projects, because we have not talked about France, we have not talked about the French-German engine here, which is always seemed to be whenever there is a big thing in Europe and there's some innovative format or a step forward, it needs to be somehow a French-German initiative. Well, there's hardly anything to see here. Do we see a shift more towards the east? So do we see a strong engine, a Swedish, Finnish, Polish, Baltic engine coming up, which may also be very instrumental for that interim period Andreas was alerting to? I don't know, how would you see that, Mina? Maybe I can have your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, apparently, I have coined this new abbreviation called NCEE. I just added the North to the Central and Eastern Europe on Twitter because it was shorter. But anyways, yes, there's definitely this dynamic. The frustration with Germany and France is like extreme, not only in the eastern parts of Europe, but also in the north. There's like quite a lot of Nordic people, like not only from Finland, but also from Sweden and Denmark, have been quite amazed at how Germany has the German communication has been absolutely catastrophic, you have to say, but also just how Germany is struggling to do something that looks to us like the very obvious right thing to do in this moment. there's not much understanding of and no patience for Germany's internal struggles with its past and whatever. So there is definitely this very strong momentum now that this group of countries, like basically Russia's direct neighborhood. Of course, like Sweden and Denmark and Norway are further away from Russia, but they still very much belong to this Nordic club, and the Nordics kind of like they stick together. So there is this strong feeling now of having this very crucial, like very existential interest in stopping Russia in Ukraine and not letting it get away with anything this time, because basically that was the huge mistake made in 2014, that business went on as usual, and Putin learned that he can annex territory and get away with it. So there is this like very great concern that, and honestly, I share that concern from what I hear, what I see. When I talk to people in Berlin, I do share this concern that there is this kind of like willingness to accept Ukraine's defeat as unavoidable. And that's why there is, simply because Russia is bigger. So you just look at the numbers and don't really look at like other factors such as like willingness to defend, morale and whatever. Many Russian narratives are quite strong in Germany, and so there's this concern in NCEE, Northeastern Europe, and that France and Germany may be willing to accept some kind of frozen, like kind of yet another frozen conflict in the post-Soviet region as a result of this war. And that they are just kind of like prioritizing like getting this war to end rather sooner than later, and to avoid further bloodshed, which is like the favorite like rhetoric of these German open letter writers. And this is like a huge like fundamental difference. I mean, everyone in Europe agrees that geography can't be changed and that Russia won't go away. Russia will stay there where it is. But the conclusions are very different, and it seems that in France and Germany and further away from Russia, there's this idea that since geography can't be changed and we have to find a way, some kind of modus operandi with Russia at some point again, we shouldn't burn all the bridges. And it's a complete opposite in Russia's direct neighborhood and vicinity. These states have this existential interest in Russia never again being able to attack any other neighbors. So this is right now, I think, the biggest obstacle to like a kind of concerted European Western effort, like that there is no consensus on what is in Europe's interest here. So that will have to be, and in a way, I would say that this is very much an ad hoc coalition right now, because there is this very like essential national security interest, and on other matters, like they do have some like same interests also within the EU. There was, for example, this letter against like treaty changes in this moment, also because of the war. So there are some similar positions, but like I honestly can't imagine like, well, most people ask like, will Poland lead the Northern Eastern Bloc? Because it's the biggest state, obviously, definitely not like that. The Nordic states would not accept any kind of Polish leadership because of the big differences on rule of law and democracy. And I'm not sure whether this will be a very like long-term thing and a stable thing. I do hope so, because I think that the EU would profit from less Franco-German tandem and more kind of like evenly distributed power balance, whatever. And especially from France and Germany finally learning to understand and consider more closely, especially the security interests of the Eastern member states and Northern ones as well. Currently, I don't really see that coming, and that remains a problem. Yeah. So we'll see, basically.
Yeah. Okay, but yeah, thank you for this assessment and from the perspective of the Nordic countries. I mean, I think it is of course by no accident that that the Baltic states, Finland and Poland, in all these 5 countries, I think this whole idea of Russian imperialism had triggered many other associations and ideas than in Germany. In Germany, I think this discourse of Russian imperialism, I think this is one of the core problems of the German politics, is that this has been largely overlooked and not, they have not heard it, they have not really reacted to that. This was always seen as some kind of Russian folklore, which was something Putin did for like domestic purposes, maybe, in order to give like the Russians a better feeling of national sentiment, but not as a foreign policy option. And I think this has been well understood, in particular in these countries, Finland, the Baltics, and Poland. I mean, because of their own history with the Russian Empire. So I think that is absolutely a mindset, a different mindset in the domestic politics, which I think also explains a lot why the things in Germany are still so difficult and different from the reactions we have seen in other parts of Europe. Okay, but now let's take the audience in. We still have a few minutes, I think. I first saw the hand up by Georg Krauchenberg, and you go first, and then I have another question here in the chat.
Hello, Krauchenberg from IDM. I hope you can hear me. I have two questions to Professor Ungurianu. The one is about the shaky situation of Moldova, and I wonder what could Romania do and do more, because I remember when Maia Sandu, the pro-Western president of Moldova, already had big problems last year about natural gas, the price, and they should pay for Transnistria as well, and so on. I wonder that since years, there doesn't seem to be a connection between Romania and Moldova, a gas pipeline, because Romania has one of the biggest fields discovered offshore at the Danube Delta, and due to some tax reason, other influences, it was simply not developed, and I think it's extremely unfortunate. Maybe this is one thing, and the other is about grain. Now there are 25 million tons of grain or whatever in Ukraine, and of course it cannot be all shipped on land. There are better connections now to Poland, but what is Romania ready to do? I have heard Constanza said capacities are limited. However, there's the Danube also. Well, what about sending more grain to Danube ports, and there it could be shipped upstream? There are Austrian investors like Mr. Bardot, you know, probably. He's sending since years grain on the Danube. Do you know anything about this? Thank you.
Yeah, Mihai, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. Now, in the past couple of years, since the gas pipeline between Iași, which is the second largest city in Romania, and Ungheni on the other side of the Prut, River Prut, has been made functional. So in the past couple of years, Romania has fed the Moldovan gas system with about 20% of the needs of the country. So it works. It works. It will take some good years up to the moment when the newly discovered oil fields on the Romanian continental shelf in the Black Sea will be made, let's say, economically valid in terms of exploitation and exportation. But up to that point, Romania is basically offering Moldova 1/5, 1/4 of its needs. It depends very much, the quantity depends very much on Moldova's direct interest, economic interest, because they have quite a serious and difficult contract with Gazprom. So basically they cannot escape the clutches of Gazprom in terms of their gas dependency on Moscow. So this is what's been left, so to say, and then they resort to Romanian gas, mostly to cover, in terms of crisis like winter time, the necessary needs for the population. Second, for the grain, yes, Constanța, it's only now developing its capacities of taking in large quantities of grain, of Ukrainian grain. The problem is not to bring them to Constanța. The problem is to have them processed in time. And Constanța has not been developed on this very side of its let's say, activity. It will take something like 6 months to 8 months to re-operationalize the harbor, with that part of the harbor which would directly deal with the with processing the grain and reship it on different barges. As for the Danube, yes, it is feasible to take the grain upstream from Romania into Hungary, Austria, and further on to Ulm. The problem, nevertheless, it is very costly, at least in this very moment. So which makes transportation on rail less complicated and in a way more secure for the quantities of grain that could be shipped to the center of the continent. But we're not talking about large quantities of grain, because this is what the train has a capacity of doing, whereas the barges on the Danube would certainly be more effective. But I would suggest, I would say, since I've been a part of a lot of discussions addressing what Romania could do to help the Ukrainians export their grain, I think solutions are at hand. It takes, nevertheless, a bit of time and extra money, but they're at hand and they're feasible.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also was wondering the past weeks, where is this big European initiative on this question? I mean, helping Ukraine to get the grain out of the country. I mean, if the Black Sea is not an option, then of course there might be alternative roads which needs to be explored, and then it needs to be, if it cannot be done, you know, by enterprises, it needs to be done by state authorities, or at least backed up by state authorities and financial institutions. So it's also, I think, something Europe could do more, could be quicker on that very much. I have another question, which is from Cornelio Biola, from our participants. Yeah, next to the thank to the panel. The question is referring to Germany's policy. So, is there? Are we witnessing now the rise of a more confident German foreign policy with a more geopolitically ambitious agenda? And if yes, what would this mean for European security? So I think I hand over this question first to Andreas and then to Mina, since both are following German politics from different locations.
Well, I'm just saying here my personal sort of impression. My impression is that exactly the confidence is still missing. I think the direction has changed. The in a way, the geopolitical orientation has changed. Above all, this sort of Ostpolitik has, the old Ostpolitik has largely disappeared. The old new Ostpolitik, partly one should say, and now we have a more, I don't know whether realism is a good word for that, but there is a more sort of pragmatic, practical approach to security, and less of this romanticization, actually, of Russia that was already mentioned. But the confidence, I think, is still missing. And also my feeling is that, you know, there were these predictions, was it by Mersheimer and by others, that, you know, Germany would become like a hegemon again and would try to sort of, again, to create some sort of empire and all of that. I don't think that's going to happen. I think actually it's going to be the other way around, that Germany is going to look for leadership, or, you know, look to Europeanize everything as possible. I also hope for a sort of rebirth of the sort of transatlantic relationship, which is actually, I would even say, happening to a degree already. And if we get a more or less acceptable new president in 2 years, that will continue. But Germany will probably remain sort of not very confident for a while, and will rather look for orientation from other countries. Like we had, for instance, now this seemingly coordination between Germany, Great Britain, and the US concerning the these how are they called, the multiple rocket launchers, and which is, I think, something that Germany would never have decided by itself. It needed sort of the pushing or the example from Britain and the US, and then it could also say, okay, then we will also send that to Ukraine. So, but in a way, I would here also defend Germany, that this lacking confidence is in a way natural, in that we have not been very much engaged in that in the past, and we are learning to find here our sort of position and orientation.
Yeah, Mina?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like Germany is not very confident right now, and I think it will take quite a long time to build that confidence. And in general, I always say when I'm asked about the Zeitenwende, this watershed moment, that give it 10 years and it will happen. Because the thing with Zeitenwende is that I think it has been kind of not only misunderstood in multiple ways and at multiple stages, but also watered down by the German government already in many steps. First of all, I think when Scholz announced it, he was still kind of like assuming that this war would not last longer than weeks at maximum, and that afterwards Germany would just like basically start to fulfill the obligations it's supposed to have been fulfilling for a long time. So I don't think that it was meant as such a dramatic 180 degrees U-turn as it was understood, especially like in Germany's European partner countries. And the thing with the Zeitenwende is like certainly a period of many illusions is over now. That for sure, and I think, but this change in mentality, it will take time. Like you can see that there's neither yet the political will nor is the population on board. So this will take time, and the thing is, like, because like you also mentioned this, Andreas, that the German Bundeswehr is the German army is quite in an unhappy state, and even if Germany wanted to make Zeitenwende happen right here, right now, even if the political will was there, which isn't yet, it would still take a long time, because you don't really like it will take really years and years to build up the capacities of the Bundeswehr. Like this 100 billion euros are a good start, but it really depends on how they are spent, whether some structures will be changed in German defense policy and in the like procurement procedures and all that. From a Nordic perspective, I hope that Germany will finally develop a more strategic view of the Baltic Sea, because I think that Germany, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, but also my more senior colleagues, that Germany has suffered from a certain kind of maritime blindness for a long time, not really viewing the Baltic Sea as a strategic and like region from a security perspective, but more like just like everything is like just trade and economy and so on. So this is something that needs to change, because Germany is at the Baltic Sea, like it is one of the Baltic Sea states, and somehow I have the feeling that it's not very well ingrained in German consciousness, because Germany tends to look more like westward and to France for historic reasons. So I think that for example, a deeper integration as this kind of Anlehnungsmacht, like a leaning nation in the Baltic Sea region, is something that could it would be very welcomed by the other Baltic Sea states, and it could help Germany somehow kind of to get more deeply integrated into the regional security strategy or architecture.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I better not continue with this, because I certainly also have my ideas about German foreign policy. Not in order to turn this in a total German focus debate, because indeed I would think, I would just underline what Andreas just said is, we have talked about a lot about Germany, about Europe, about the different regions in Europe and their contribution and how they are affected, and but also what they could bring in. We talked about Romania, we talked about the very fragile situation in Moldova and so on. But at the end of the day, one has to say very bluntly, without US support, in particular military support and financial support, maybe Ukraine would be in a much worse situation for sure. And that also is a message to Europe, one has to say. Yeah. So if on the other side of the Atlantic, we would have a totally different administration, the situation would really look disastrous. And many of the discussions we here just have, so what could the EU do, and who does the first step, and whether we can wait for like the Germans to make their U-turn, and so on. All these debates would no longer be possible, because simply the war would look very different from what we see. That would be like my overall assessment here, and that I think is also something I guess which needs to be much more reflected on the European level, not just within NATO, of course. I think there it is very present, but also within European Union, and this more smaller European corporations like the 3C Corporation and Nordics and so on. I don't know, Sebastian, can I still have a last round, or should we come to a close? I asked the host maybe, because I think we're running a bit over time. But otherwise I would. If you still have the time, go for it. I guess people
I will be also very brief in the summary then.
Yeah, people may also have other plans for this evening instead of staying with us. But maybe my last point, and maybe you can give us a quick round, is basically following up a point done earlier by Andreas about this interim issue. I mean, there is this debate, and you have probably taken notice of that, which was at the fringes of the European Council summit. It was this debate under the heading of Wider Europe. I don't think this is a good title, but nevertheless, it is basically, and maybe that's so bringing France finally back in on this Macron initiative of building a European political community. At the same time, there is a proposal by Charles Michel, the EU president. He calls for a European geopolitical community. Others call for European confederation, but all these ideas go somehow in the same direction, to try to fill this gap between candidate status and the proper accession period. Is there anything, is this just hot air for you, or is there anything worthwhile looking at this? It's an issue which will be taken up by the Czech presidency. I have learned today that in October the Czechs will have an initiative on this Wider Europe, including all EU states and all non-EU states, non-European EU states into a wider gathering. So certainly something is happening, but are we seeing a new talking shop, a new waiting room, or do we see something more substantial which really could be also a change in frameworks and structure? And maybe we go the other order and start with Andreas, Mihai, and then finally Mina.
Yes, thanks, Ulrich. I did not mention these projects because you had a paper on that with Sebastian. I've actually already quoted it in an article that came out in Ukrainian and Russian on Novoye Vremya, or the New Voice of Ukraine, as it calls itself now, and will also come out in Ukraine Analysen and somewhere in English. I can't remember. Somewhere it should be out in English as well. So the I think that these are actually excellent ideas, and the encouraging thing about them is that they come from Western continental European countries, from Michel as a Belgian, then from Macron as a Frenchman. The European Confederation comes from France. So that is actually, to me, the interesting thing here. We had earlier the Eastern Partnership was a Polish-Swedish project. Yeah, so usually you would expect these ideas to come from somewhere else. From my point of view, that all makes perfect sense, because we have these countries now, both in the West and in the East, that are European, and for one reason or another not in the European Union, and have actually very congruent views on international affairs, very congruent with the European Union. On the West we have Britain and Norway and Iceland and perhaps even Switzerland, and then we have in the East the Balkan countries that are not yet in, except perhaps for Serbia, as well as the association trio. And so I think that is a good idea, and yeah, I mean that's the way to go, and so that and maybe that is even perhaps something in terms of this whole debate about how Europe should position itself internationally. Maybe that is an even more important debate than the well-known debate about supranationalism and majority voting within the EU, because that is probably still something very important to become more effective on the international arena, but to get more weight on the international arena. These projects are of course even more important, because then you bring in more countries, more economic and military firepower, if you like. That's why I'm all in for it, and yeah, it's a very, very nice little paper that you published with Sebastian.
I was going also to quote Ulrich and Sebastian's paper about this. Yeah, well, you have stolen the show. I would only add something here. Okay, whatever can be created to overcome the so-called expansion fatigues and everything like this is welcome. It might not be perfect. I still have questions about what could membership with capital letter mean in comparison with membership or quite comma membership with a small letter for other countries, mostly in the Balkan area, mean. It's still unclear how would such a project deal with Turkey, which cannot be, this is a subject we cannot avoid in any case. They have their own history of candidatureship, and I think making them adversaries to whatever idea would come from the European Union would do certainly not good to all of us. And when it comes to Moldova and Ukraine, again, where would they be? Would it be the famous circular circles, the unique center circular circles design that was aired back in Europe some 10 years ago and had its own evolution, the concentric circles, the European Union organized as the systems, as a solar system. It's still unclear, but if it is something to be done, at least we have a subject to work on. And this is for me the full half of the glass.
Yeah, great insights. I haven't read the paper yet, but I will now that it was praised already. I think none of these ideas are really new, as Mihai just pointed out. The debate on differentiated integration is probably as old as European integration as such, as a project. And it will definitely have to be addressed. But I think there's this kind of new old debate that has come up with the candidate status for Ukraine and Moldova, which is the one between the proponents of enlargement and the proponents of deeper integration. So this is in a way like at least latently a part of any of these ideas. And then the question is, what exactly would this entail? What would you offer to the European states that have not been interested in integrating with the EU so far? Like, what can you offer to them that makes them interested in participating? And then on the other hand, how do you manage the expectations of the countries who do want to join? And how do you make sure that this doesn't become yet another waiting room or another method of like keeping them at arm's length? And I think we can learn quite a lot from the failures of the Eastern Partnership. So, and then, for example, like it's good that you pointed out like the special role that Turkey has to play, Michael, but I would also like to emphasize Georgia, which is not only a challenge in terms of like in politically, but also geographically. It's just like on the other side of the Black Sea. How do you deal with that? Like how do you, in what way do you integrate Georgia, like in literally that kind of like geographical outer circle? And I think there are still like, I think it's good if there's something that can like be a bridge between the simply getting the candidate status and like finally becoming a member for especially Ukraine that just really needs this perspective. But the question is like, it has to be substantial. It has to entail some concrete steps of integration. It can't be just something that they get invited to summits or whatever. Like it needs to be concrete. And it can't risk becoming like an alternative for real membership. So I'm not entirely sure what will be the added value of something like this compared to just like really consequently working with Ukraine and Moldova, of course, to fulfill the acquis. But yeah. It would have to be like more concrete than these suggestions so far.
Sure, I guess the debate has just started at the European level, I think. And indeed, there was a debriefing from the last OICO I came across from the permanent representation in Germany's permanent representation to the EU. And there was some remarks about that, in particular, the role of Turkey and the UK would be very unclear in this kind of format. So I think there are still, these kind of questions. On the other hand, I think there is some moment now after this historic decision made by OICO at the last summit to get a new project started, which also has indeed all these implications. But I totally agree, it needs to be operationalized, it needs to be substantial, and it needs not to send the wrong messages to the West Balkans or to Ukraine or to others. So I think all these are, I think, three criteria which absolutely need to be fulfilled. Otherwise, it will just be another like gathering setting with no meanings, and I think this is the last thing Europe needs. So yeah, but maybe on that note, I shall conclude and thank you all very much for that panel, for that excellent discussion we had. Many things put on the table. I have the feeling we should meet more often. But I think that was a very good occasion now, and maybe that needs to be continued in one way or the other. I hope you find opportunities for that. So thank you very much, and I would now hand over to Sebastian maybe for some final words to conclude. I'm very grateful for all of you, first panel, second panel, that you joined that undertaking, and I'm sure we will also find new friends and listeners when the whole thing is on YouTube and is recorded and can be watched also later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Before I conclude, I would like to give briefly Anatoliy the possibility to say some 3 last words so that I don't cut him off again.
You are right. Thank you very much, Sebastian. You're very sensitive because you remember that this was my personal initiative. And first of all, I'd like to thank you and Ulrich for supporting me and promoting this just idea to the full-fledged online conference. That was great. Then I would like to say thank you to the panelists of the first and second round. It's a very pleasure to have a meeting with familiar or not so familiar experts and feel myself enriched with their ideas, vision, analysis, and prognosis. And finally, it is again a network building, because I feel that our network of experts on the Eastern Europe, on the security issues, on European Union enlargement and reforms, on NATO, and so on and so forth, and in Russia is getting some kind of prominence and is getting wider and deeper, and that's very great. And finally, I would like to thank personally Ulrich Schneckerer for his contribution behind the scene and on the scene too, for his moderation, and you, Sebastian, because I appreciate your kind of moderation. It's a kind of masterpiece for me. It's very light, easy, and at the same time, very effective style. So thank you very much. And finally, I would say, Ukraine is not going to surrender. We are going to win. But in order to win, we need your support. The more, the better. To our victory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I very often quote this Bavarian comedian or philosopher, Karl Valentin, and say everything has been said, but not by everybody. So I'll take the liberty as the host to have some few last words. It's going to be short because, of course, normally I would use this to shamelessly promote this policy paper, but it has been quite advertised already. And we didn't pay them, yeah, Ulrich, we didn't say that they need to do that, yeah. So it came here, and it's good because it's some sort of controversy that already started also within the IDM circle. So that's great. Thank you very much appreciated. Of course, very much appreciated also that we continue this cooperation, this 3-country cooperation, 3 institutional cooperation between Chernivtsi, Osnabrück, and Vienna. This is something that we say that shows that we really truly work cross-border, and nothing, not a pandemic, not a war, will stop us in cooperating here. And then, of course, I would like to very, very much thank all the panelists, of course, Nadija, who had to leave, but also especially Nataliya for taking the time and staying with us also for the second panel, and the wonderful second panel here, of course, Mina, but also Mihai and Andreas. Thank you very much for all these insights. As it has been mentioned, the recording of that debate will be available on the YouTube channel of IDM Vienna. Spread the word and connect on Twitter. And then last but not least, you always know that these things only work with people in the background that make it work. So a big thank you to Fiona, and also a big thank you to Carlotta, who have been running the live stream and monitoring what is happening on YouTube. This was a seminar on the regional perspectives on the war in Ukraine. And take care, stay safe, and all the best from Vienna to the various places that participated here. Thank you very much.
All the best to everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.